Hello everyone, dear Manhwa fans. I hope you're having an amazing day. Before we begin, I want to send a very special shout out to those who left comments on the previous video. A huge hug to DarkGamer3492, who was the fastest to drop the first comment last time. Thank you so much. Also, before we dive in, I wanted to let you know that I've uploaded 2 special videos exclusively for channel members. Now, without further ado, let's jump into this exciting recap. Tae's blush deepened when he realized the teacher was fully aware of their situation. However, for her, the experience during their previous mass had not been pleasant. She'd been startled when she saw him. This, though, was no consolation for Tae, as he knew he needed to satisfy her in some way. While it sounded like a fair arrangement, mutual support, the teacher saw no reason to reject the offer. Still, Tae wondered why the teacher was going along with all of this. She understood what he was trying to ask and explained that when she was a student, she had focused entirely on her academics and had never experienced love. Now, she deeply regretted that decision. While Tae had always seen her as someone popular, she had never thought of herself that way. When she achieved her career goals, she realized how much she had missed by not embracing love in her youth. Despite being in her 30s, whenever she went out with someone, they immediately suggested marriage. But she didn't want that. It felt like a waste of time. She still wanted to enjoy life on her own terms, even if it was a bit late. She liked the feeling of youth. Tae understood this and genuinely wanted to know her thoughts. He saw this as a great opportunity to understand her better, but he still wasn't sure what she meant by purifying her soul. Suddenly, a message popped up. A new heroine had appeared. Tae was shocked to see that the teacher was now officially a heroine. Her profile appeared immediately, and Tae realized that the only way to increase their affinity was through a mass. Tae couldn't believe such a trait existed. From what he could tell, purifying her soul meant she would stop believing in God, at least temporarily, and that this would increase their connection. This gave him even more reason to accept the teacher's offer. She kissed him, knowing he would agree, and new event notifications appeared, including secret contracts with the teacher. Thanks to their high affinity, he had now reached the level required for the ritual and could begin the scene. Time seemed to freeze after her words. Even though he knew she moved quickly, impatient for the ceremony, he could feel her eagerness. She took the lead, leaving Tae stunned. To Lee, Tae was just an innocent student, but after reading his report, she noticed his hidden potential. If he had mentioned a mass in his report, she would have already given him an A. But now, she would teach him herself. Lee began by cleaning the chalice, and Tae noticed her technique was better than Hung's, which surprised him. Before starting the ritual, Tae wanted to try something new. For Lee, it meant that Tae wanted to lead the prayer, but in reality, he just wanted to contribute to her soul's purification. He didn't want her doing all the work. To Lee, Tae was a diligent student. She recognized the boy's potential and couldn't help but recall a bathroom conversation between 2 people talking about someone's big heart. Before the ritual began, Tae ate some flan and performed a hand technique like a ninja. Everything seemed to be going well, until he noticed the teacher's affinity level was only at 6. He had expected it to be higher and assumed her age might have played a role, that what he had done wasn't enough. Finally, they began the mass. Despite Tae leading, her soul was not fully purified. The affinity only rose to 15. She quickly took over and told him that he lacked rhythm, which made Tae realize a lot. Flustered by the change in pace, he spilled the holy water. Afterward, Tae knew he had completely failed in purifying Lee's soul and had returned to square one. Unsure of what to do, he stood in silence until she addressed his unease. She explained that when reading his report, she felt like all he had done was adapt to her instead of being genuine. Although Tae didn't immediately understand, he reflected on his actions and said he had tried to consider her as much as possible. But Lee had already clarified that point. Every person sees things differently. She asked him to reflect, because a submissive attitude wouldn't be attractive to her. To leave a lasting impression, he needed to plan a different strategy, something Tae quickly grasped. He realized his approach had been too simple, and he hadn't considered her circumstances. Now he understood why Lee had been drawn to him in the first place. She hoped Tae would learn from the experience and be ready for another chance next time. Although Tae was still worried about not fulfilling his part of the deal and didn't fully understand why the professor was saying those things, his event had been completed, and the professor expressed hope that he would continue to grow, especially in masses and dates. She told him that he had repaid his debt in advance. Tae asked if she wanted to pray together again in the future, but she didn't give a clear answer. With that, Tae said goodbye to Lee. He knew he had faced setbacks, But thanks to his professor, he found a way to turn things around. He used his save pass to give himself a fresh start and decided to redo the date with Gia. Tae wanted to forget his past failure and start seeing her differently. We see Gia waiting patiently for his arrival until she hears his voice. Although Tae apologizes for being late, this time he's determined not to mess it up. From the very start, he changes his approach to impress her. Instead of going somewhere ordinary, he takes her to his favorite spot and orders his go-to dish from the menu to show her why he loves it. Gia takes a bite and finds it delicious, enjoying both the texture and flavor. Tae notices that she appreciates the food, even if her expression doesn't fully show it. Still, in his mind, he feels happy. Gia looks content next to him and soon brings up why they're on a date and the report he's trying to replace with the professor. Tae had been waiting for that question, and when the dialogue options finally appear, he gets nervous. But remembering Lee's advice about perspectives, he decides to try again. He answers that he feels in sync with her, even if it makes him nervous. Gia thanks Tae for seeing her in a positive light and says she wants to meet his expectations, which surprises him. She even decides to pay for the meal this time, saying the place was a great pick. Tae reflects on how mysterious the mind of a woman can be, but realizes Gia is unlike anyone he's met before. After eating, Gia wants to know where they're headed next. Tae has 3 new options. With more experience under his belt, making decisions has become easier, so he follows his gut and takes her to a billiards hall. Although Gia doesn't know how to play, Tae offers to teach her. He carefully explains how to get the right stance. When she finally manages it, he holds her hand to show her that billiards is about precision, not power. The close contact makes Gia nervous, but she manages a solid shot and surprises herself. Now that she understands how to play, she wants to try on her own, something Tae is happy to see. He's glad she's enjoying herself. His only problem is that he can't stop staring at her impressive dog. Later that afternoon, they head to a cafe because Tae lost a bet about who would pay for the drinks. Gia, teasing, says she'll teach him how to win next time. Her words make Tae blush even more. The rest of their date goes smoothly. They're both clearly enjoying each other's company, and Gia's affinity level keeps rising. By the end of the date, when the event concludes, Gia genuinely says she had a good time. Her final affinity score is 25 points, which makes Tae extremely happy, especially knowing he had previously only reached 3. The difference in outcome is obvious. However, the save pass he used was now broken. Tae also asks Gia to message him when she gets home safely. At that moment, Gia surprises him by asking for something more. She gently takes his hand. Tae is confused at first, but Gia admits that parting ways like that feels a bit sad. She suggests they spend a little more time together, which truly moves Tae, especially since this is his first time experiencing something like this. Trusting in the unexpected turn of events, a new event begins. The night is still young. Tae is amazed by how his previous save allowed him to unlock this moment, especially since he's now drinking with Gia. What started as a mission now feels genuine, and he has a good feeling about it. Gia thanks Tae for spending time with her so late, even if it was a last-minute invitation, because she had so much fun and didn't want the night to end. Ken didn't mind staying a bit longer, even though he was secretly nervous and tried not to show it. They talked about how people often asked Gia out, but she always ended up feeling uncomfortable. She said she viewed every guy as a nerd, and that made things awkward. Tae didn't really get that last part, so Gia explained that it had to do with the labels people put on her. Those titles led to assumptions, and she didn't like when people treated her with too much consideration or had preset expectations about who she was. But with Tae, it was different. He didn't seem to care about who she was supposed to be. For Tae, meeting Gia for the first time felt like meeting a goddess. He realized that if it hadn't been for the interest gauge showing her reactions and how it dropped, he never would have noticed he was ruining the date or discovered what she really liked. In other words, he could now act more strategically, knowing what choices to make. He told Gia that in this world, everyone tries to impress others based on looks, and to him, guys who rush things aren't attractive. Gia found this point of view interesting, since she felt the same way. That's how the evening began, with drinks. After a while, Tae realized they'd had 5 bottles, and things might have gotten out of hand. He noticed Gia didn't look too steady, and when he suggested leaving, she stood up and said she was going to the restroom. He understood but felt uneasy about letting her go alone. While waiting, Tae started thinking about what to do next. The event wasn't over, and he wasn't sure if he should suggest calling it a night. Since her interest level was at 25, he knew he could play it safe and be the gentleman, but what if she wanted to keep going? He figured he should be ready for anything. When he snapped back to reality, he noticed she was taking a while. Concerned, he went to check on her. Upon entering, he found Gia trying to stand up, with water all over the floor. He rushed to help her. She was a little dazed but unhurt, just drenched. Still, he couldn't help admiring her impressive personality, which was expected of her. Gia started waking up, and upon seeing Tae next to her, realized her clothes were soaked with water. Embarrassed, she let out a loud scream. A waiter nearby came to check what had happened, but Gia and Tae quickly hid in one of the bathroom stalls. Inside, Gia asked Tae if he'd seen anything. If he had, she wanted him to act like he hadn't. Tae realized she was deeply embarrassed, even though all that had happened was getting her clothes wet. Then, a new dialogue prompt appeared for Tae. He hesitated. He knew a moral answer wouldn't lead anywhere, but keeping her secret might increase her interest. Still, he wasn't sure. He asked Gia if she wanted him to keep the secret for free. Gia wanted to know how she could be sure he would. Tae was presented with 3 new choices, but none seemed great. He realized they wouldn't raise her interest either. He had no save points left and thought of picking one and calling it a joke. But then he remembered everything that had happened during the date and realized the answer was right in front of him. He chose to ask Gia to clean the chalice. Gia didn't quite understand what that meant at first, so Tae explained in detail. He reminded her that she liked a more assertive masculinity, though she assumed he was joking. His tone and actions said otherwise. Tae, deep down, was nervous. He didn't know if this would work, but he also knew that if she wanted him to keep her secret, she just needed to follow through. Complaining wouldn't change anything, and he knew that. To his surprise, Gia actually started doing what he asked, simply to ensure he'd keep her secret. Tae thought he might be imagining things, but it was really happening. The goal of the entire class was now in front of him, cleaning the chalice. And even though he realized he didn't have much experience, it was still incredibly tempting for Tae. The waiter asked Gia if she was okay and what had happened, and Tae knew that if she didn't respond, it would sound suspicious. But he also didn't know what to say himself, especially since they were in the women's bathroom. Gia calmly replied that she was fine and had just dropped a few things, which the waiter accepted before leaving. Tae felt relieved once the waiter was gone, but now Gia wanted to start over. Tae agreed, although he was surprised that she was the one taking the lead. He checked her affinity level and noticed that her interest hadn't changed. However, when new options appeared, he decided to have her clean the chalice thoroughly, not just superficially. He knew that kind of intensity appealed to her. When Tae handed her a bit of holy water and asked her to drink it all, she did so willingly and requested that it remain their little secret. Tae understood completely, and he also saw her interest suddenly spike. He had finally figured out how to attract her, and with that, the night is still young event came to an end. The next day, Tae felt like he was walking through a dream. He'd gone out with Gia and uncovered a secret no one else knew, that she liked bold masculinity. But he noticed that when she returned home alone, she seemed a bit distant, and he wondered if everything was okay. Later, he went to submit his report to his professor. She opened the door and invited Tae in. That afternoon, she praised Tae's report and said it was a great example worth presenting. She admired his work and was sure he'd receive excellent marks. Tae thanked her and reflected that without her advice, none of it would have worked out. He tried to remind her about the advice she had given him and how helpful it had been. But the professor looked a bit confused. She didn't recall giving that specific advice, as she often spoke about many things during her lectures. Tae found this odd, but she smiled and said she was glad it helped, even if she couldn't remember saying it. Tae was about to tell her about their last conversation, but stopped when he noticed something off. Her reaction didn't seem normal. As he looked at her more closely, he realized she wasn't showing any affection toward him, which shocked him. He decided to use his save token to erase all the data related to her. He told her that everything was fine, but he soon realized that by returning to the past, he had erased every interaction they'd shared. This left him confused, especially since she was now letting him go home as if nothing had happened. The confusion only grew. Even though she'd already read his report, things felt different. Tae realized the timeline had shifted because of their past agreement, and now he wasn't sure how things would change. However, he remembered what the professor had said when their event began. She hoped he would grow. Motivated by that, he stood up and proposed to the professor that they hold a ceremony together as a way to return the favor for her guidance. The professor was stunned and didn't understand what he meant. Despite her surprise, Tae explained that he had seen her having a ceremony with another student and now wanted to create his own opportunities. She was left completely stunned after hearing those words, but Tae looked at her with unwavering determination. With little else to say, she admitted that she had already figured out that the student had been Tae, though she never imagined he would make such a bold proposition. Even after acknowledging that she had done that with the other student, she apologized and assured him that she wasn't an easy woman. However, Tae didn't see her that way. In a confident tone, he remarked that it was a shame someone as interesting as the professor had to settle for less. After all, he had noticed that during their previous ceremony, she didn't even enjoy it. Convinced he could make her true wish come true, he asked if she wasn't just a little bit curious. Lee, lost in thought, tried to understand what kind of power this was. Eventually, she admitted that it intrigued her, but asked Tae what exactly he would do. Without being able to explain it in words, Tae stepped closer and demonstrated a jutsu. The gesture filled Ai with an unexpected peace in her heart. That's when Tai looked her straight in the eyes and asked if she desired a consecration. It was the first time anyone had treated her that way, and the idea excited her a little. She also noticed how incredibly skilled Tae was with his jutsu. With that, he continued his ritual to soothe the sins weighing on her, until suddenly he stopped. Lee felt part of her inner corruption rising from deep within her soul and, confused by the pause, asked why he had stopped. Tae reminded her that she had been the one to say she didn't want to have a ceremony with him, so he couldn't proceed unless that changed. In his mind, Tae already knew what her answer would be. And before the moment dragged on too long, he took control. Lee blushed slightly, though she couldn't help but feel uneasy, especially considering they were still in class. Still, she asked Tae if he was truly confident in his decision, because she had only accepted his proposal on the condition that he prove he was different from the other students. For that reason, she decided to put him to the test. At that moment, the system notified Tae that a new heroine had been unlocked and her profile had been updated. Before leaving, Lee whispered to him that she'd be staying in a nearby magical town and was curious to see what he thought of it. Tae knew his plan had worked. He had earned himself another chance with the professor. Just then, the system notified him of a new event, testing my strength. The heroine's attraction level was now high enough to initiate a consecration, triggering the beginning of the ceremony. As he analyzed the situation, Tae noticed that both the event name and location had changed, but that didn't worry him. He knew he had to make the most of the opportunity. He remembered that Lee's attraction level increased after every ceremony, and in this case, it hadn't dropped. Once inside the room, Lee casually asked him if he wanted to eat something first. However, Tae knew from experience that the best strategy with her was to kiss her as soon as possible, mainly to break any tension right away. That kind of action completely caught Ali off guard. Without wasting time, Tae moved on with the preparations for the ceremony, but she asked him to wait a moment since she wanted to take a bath first. For Tae, that wasn't an issue at all, as his main goal was to revitalize her heart. Still, Lee blushed slightly when she saw Tae calmly snacking as if nothing about the situation fazed him. In her mind, she couldn't make sense of what was happening. Even though Tae was younger, he somehow seemed to know every weak spot in her heart. She wondered if he would truly pass her test, because even as she tried to resist, deep down she felt such peace that she couldn't ignore it. Tae had a natural gift for guiding her. However, when he pointed out which part of her soul was being affected, she was left speechless. Tae gently stopped and asked Ali to position herself comfortably for the consecration. Despite feeling a little embarrassed, she wanted everything to be over quickly, so much so that she actually wanted to start as soon as possible. At that moment, her mind was completely devoted to her passionate faith. Without hesitation, she asked Tae if he would begin reading the Bible right away. Tae paused for a second. He had waited so long to hear those words. Though she didn't know it, many people on campus saw her as an icon because of her unmatched beauty. But now, she was about to have a ceremony with him, and Tae never imagined she'd plead for it like that. With a slight smile, Tae playfully asked if she was testing him. A bit flustered, she replied that they should begin quickly, otherwise she'd start judging his performance. If he took too long, she'd start docking points, so she insisted that he begin the reading. Following her request, Tae recited the first prayer, cleansing a deep-rooted sin, which left Ali absolutely amazed. Though he felt a bit shy, Tae wondered if she would laugh at him. But instead, he noticed her affinity score, which had been at 0, suddenly shoot up to 20. Even though she had asked him to read the Bible, Lee realized going that fast could be risky. Still, Tae ignored her concern and took her by the arm so they could continue praying even faster. In Tae's mind, he knew that any hesitation would give her a chance to take control again. Although the idea sounded absurd, his goal was to purify all her sins as quickly as possible, so they kept reciting the prayers without pause. Deep in her thoughts, Lee started to feel something strange. Tae was reading even faster, and for the first time, she wasn't the one in control. She'd always been the lead during consecrations, but this time it was different. Tae was doing whatever he wanted, as if it were a simple game. Noticing this, he jokingly told her not to get mad. They were only just getting started. Then she remembered the second piece of advice she'd been given. Everyone has their own feelings. At that moment, the system notified Tae of a new unexpected event. He had to find Lee's weak points, and as a reward, he would receive a spiritual moment. Tae assumed there had to be a specific weak point that could be key to guiding her to the path of God. When he found it, Lee was completely stunned. Tae, noticing her reaction, asked if it was working. He could tell she was starting to enjoy the ceremony. Motivated, he continued purifying her deepest sins. The system notified him that the spiritual moment was continuing as an unexpected reward. Energized by this, Tae kept reading the Bible without pause. With every word he spoke, Lee's interest kept rising. Now he understood. This reward was truly something remarkable, and he maintained his rhythm. However, the professor began to feel uneasy. She knew that if Tae kept going like that, her dignity as the elder and her reputation as a divine figure wouldn't be enough to shield her. Every time she heard his voice, her mind went completely blank. At first, she believed it had nothing to do with her, but in the end, she let Tae continue guiding her. Inside, an unfamiliar feeling began to surface, one she didn't fully understand. Without realizing it, a small trace of corruption escaped her heart. For Tae, it was astonishing. Even though he couldn't fully control Lee's sins, when he felt the power slipping away, he used the holy water to purify her soul. At last, Tae had achieved his goal. With a calm voice, he asked Ali if she was feeling all right. Although she didn't fully understand yet, the system notified them that the spiritual moment had come to an end. For Tae, this time had been different. Lee's interest had risen to 40 points, much higher than before. But then something unexpected caught his attention. The system congratulated him for reaching over 30 affinity points with 3 different heroines. Although Tae didn't fully grasp what that meant, the system informed him that his simulator would now be expanded as a reward for this achievement. Suddenly, several windows appeared around him. With his trait now enhanced to complement the love filters, Tae began noticing subtle changes in the situation. Lee, still a bit disoriented, asked him if he was okay. He answered naturally that everything was fine, but the system issued an unexpected alert. He had just experienced a divine revelation unlike anything before, and he couldn't calm down. Tae began to reflect on this strange reaction. It wasn't like anything he had felt before. Something had clearly shifted. The system indicated that Lee was now watching him with a serene expression, as if wanting to continue the ceremony. That's when Tae understood. Thanks to the love filter, he could now sense the emotional state of others and use it to his advantage. So he asked Lee if she wanted to continue the ceremony. Embarrassed, she immediately declined, but the system warned Tae that she had re-entered a spiritual state and didn't want to appear ashamed. Understanding this, Tae smiled and told her he felt a little tired and would like her to read the Bible this time. Surprisingly, she seemed pleased with that answer, though her uncertainty still lingered. To tease her, Tae asked if she was already tired. Lee denied it immediately, but in her mind, she couldn't help thinking the whole thing was ridiculous. Had she gone mad? She wasn't sure if her reaction was caused by Tae's words, but she felt the need to take control and prove who really led better. With determination, she told him he would now pay the price for showing off. Just then, the system notified them that her logic and desire were now in sync. She wanted to prove who the true leader was. Tae, internally, knew this just meant they would continue the consecration. But he also saw a softer side of her. If he let her take control, maybe it would help ease her embarrassment. Lee took a deep breath and began the first prayer, but as she did, she felt a tremble in her chest. She realized she was more sensitive than she thought, and that could be dangerous. She decided to read slowly, trying to keep the situation under control. As she proceeded, a sense of unexpected peace washed over her. Tae, on the other hand, could tell that her heart, when combined with the holy water, was unstable. He wasn't sure if she was used to this kind of thing, but the corruption he sensed inside her was stronger than the first time. When Tae called out to her, Lee thought she couldn't go on, but upon seeing his expression, she blushed deeply. Far from feeling defeated, Tae was enjoying the moment. Her reaction made him smile, and he decided to give it his all to help her find peace. With a playful grin, he asked if she really thought she could resist him. Without waiting for an answer, he began reading the Bible even faster. To Tae, this meant he was now using his secret techniques, something he had never done before. His heart filled with an indescribable sense of calm. Watching her led like that felt strangely soothing, especially because the way she read the Bible had a certain gentleness to it. but soon he realized he was going to need the holy water. Although Tae couldn't see Lee's face since her back was turned, he could sense that she too was on the verge of experiencing a new divine revelation. So he gently took her hands, and this time he was the one guiding her. Lee, caught off guard, blushed once more, but even so, she asked him to purify her soul again. Without hesitation, Tae did so, allowing her to release more corruption and find a sense of peace in the process. However, Tae looked visibly exhausted. Lee, noticing this, asked if he had enjoyed the ceremony. Seeing him like that, she felt confident that she had done well. The system notified them that although both had successfully purified her soul, Lee felt as if no one had witnessed it, which made her want to show off her accomplishment. Tae simply nodded, thinking it was better to let her have that impression than to explain the truth. Meanwhile, Lee mentally compared her first ceremony with this second one. Now she saw Tae weaker than before, which made her reflect on everything that had changed. So she awarded him something once more, which annoyed Tae. Even though he didn't think too much of it at first, his pride was hurt when she continued to boast. His frustration led them to go through the consecration again and again, hoping the professor would be more honest. However, she felt like she was losing her mind. At one point, Tae asked what grade she'd give him now. She replied, an A+. Right then, the system announced that the Test of My Worth event had concluded. The next morning, with sunlight filtering through the window, Lee began to wake up. When she realized Tae was next to her, she screamed so loud it startled him. Muttering to herself, she wondered if he was insane or if he had planned everything from the beginning. Her memories of the previous night were jumbled, and she could barely piece together what had happened during the ceremony. The only thing she knew for sure was that she had lost. She thought Tae was probably judging her harshly, but he denied it. In fact, he told her he had learned a lot about religion thanks to her. Still, Lee assumed he was just saying that to cheer her up. Something Tae knew was pretty obvious. Yet even she had to admit she'd never experienced a consecration like that before, and she didn't say it lightly. That made Tae happy, even as she continued to mumble, wondering aloud if he had a girlfriend, which left Tae completely confused. Later, the professor had to return to campus, but before leaving, she called Tae over and, without warning, kissed him on the cheek. With a smile, she said goodbye cheerfully. For Tae, that's how it all started. It goes without saying that after that, Lee asked him if he'd like to do another ceremony sometime. She even suggested they become friends with benefits. However, their relationship, though strange, didn't involve any deep connection, especially since her interest level remained at 50%. So, most likely, nothing else would happen between them. Then, Tae suddenly remembered he had class with her that day. Thankfully, he made it to university on time. When the professor told the students to take their seats, he noticed she subtly signaled him to stay quiet. Tae began thinking about where to sit, and luckily, there was an empty seat next to Lee. With her permission, he sat down. When he tried to speak to her, she turned to him, waiting to hear what he wanted. Tae wanted to ask how she got home that day, but she didn't respond. Class had already started. Although he understood, he couldn't help but wonder if something was going on, or if it was just his imagination that she seemed more distant. When class ended, Tae asked if they could talk for a moment, but she said she still had another class to attend. Even so, he gently grabbed her hand and said it wouldn't take long. Embarrassed, she asked him to let her go. Tae agreed, although he couldn't figure out what was going on or why she was reacting that way. Had he done something wrong? So he decided to activate his love filter skill. The system notified him that, because Lee was not used to sharing her feelings with anyone, she was very embarrassed by what had happened during their date. Now it all made sense. Not just her preferences, but the fact that she had let her guard down, and regaining that trust wouldn't be easy. But that wasn't the only issue. When he tried talking to her at the cafe, she excused herself, saying she had already finished eating. Later, when she was with her friends, she mentioned she had some errands to run and had to leave. Tae couldn't understand how she kept avoiding him like this. At that moment, Hong appeared and hugged him from behind, asking what he was doing just standing there. Mostly, she wanted to know what he was staring at. Quickly, Tae assured her it was nothing and covered her eyes. In his mind, he knew that if she found out he had anything going on with Ya, she might get upset. However, Hong hit him, calling him crazy for covering her eyes like that. She didn't understand what he was doing. For Tae, it was a relief she hadn't noticed Ya, and so he explained that he wanted to go to the assistant's room. He took the chance to ask Hong where she was heading. She looked at him suspiciously, saying she needed to check the MT planning and deliver the report to the faculty office. That's when Tae remembered such a thing existed at the university. Last year's MT location had been amazing. though back then he wasn't involved. Only enrolled students could go on the trip. These kinds of places were perfect for meeting people and going on dates, even if the real MT wasn't exactly seen that way. Hung was surprised by Tae's sudden interest, especially since he had said the previous year that he would never attend again. However, Tae felt that this year would be different. Finally, the day of departure arrived. While some were impatient to leave, they were surprised to see Tae, who now sported a new look. They asked what he was doing there. They thought he wasn't going to join. They also joked that someone like him, who used to get nervous around girls, wouldn't survive the event. Tae told them to shut up and confidently claimed he wasn't the same person anymore, which left everyone confused. Some joked that maybe he had hit his head too hard. Tae understood their reactions. After all, last year, he had been considered a loser. But now, something gave him confidence. When he saw Ya sitting alone, he thought it was the perfect chance to talk to her earlier than expected. However, just as he was about to approach her, Hakun stopped him, asking where he thought he was going and ordering him to sit beside her. Tae was stunned. Couldn't he choose where to sit? Hakun reminded him that she was the chief assistant to the professors and asked who else would help her carry everything. With no other choice and feeling the pressure from Hung to do what she said, Tae ended up sitting next to her. He might have missed his first chance, but there was still a whole day ahead. Later, while they grilled some delicious meat, Tae was exhausted. He wondered if his simulator had an option to skip moments like this because he had been working nonstop all afternoon. Was the whole event going to be this difficult? He also wanted to join the group gathering, but the grill smoke irritated his eyes. Hakun noticed how hard he had worked and offered him some meat, which Tai accepted gladly. For her, it was a way to help him feel better, and she planned to buy him a drink when they got back. Tae, seizing the moment, jokingly asked for an expensive drink. But Hakun, on an assistant's salary, couldn't afford such luxuries, so she told him to eat quickly and then return to the professors. Meanwhile, she caught everyone's attention and asked if they were enjoying the event. Everyone responded enthusiastically. To her, the MT represented the peak of university life, and as she always said, she wanted everyone to enjoy the party to the fullest. Some even commented on how beautiful she looked. Tae leaned in toward Hung and whispered that she hadn't told him the professor would be present, asking how it was even possible she was there. Hung explained that Lee's parents' house was nearby, so she could stay as long as she wanted. She was also in charge of all the students. Lee approached Tae and commented that they were meeting again, to which he simply nodded. She said she hoped they could have a drink together someday, and without further delay, proposed a toast. Tae agreed, and the three of them raised their glasses to celebrate. Later that evening, as the students chatted and some girls took pictures, Tae began feeling dizzy. He had drunk too much and had the sensation he might throw up. He couldn't understand how Lee and Hakun kept drinking non-stop, enjoying the party without showing any signs of fatigue. He thought about stepping away, but then noticed Jia's friend was leaving her alone. Seeing an opportunity, Tae approached to greet her, but she didn't look happy to see him. Back with Lee, she observed that Hung had an impressive alcohol tolerance, which she attributed to her determination to enjoy the MT to the fullest. Lee understood what she meant and decided to take off her coat before the heat overwhelmed her. Her beauty caught the attention of several guys, but just then, Hakun mentioned she wanted to rest. However, seeing Tae had left, she decided to go look for him. This piqued Lee's curiosity, and she pointed her in his direction. Hung found Tae near Jia and thought that despite working all day without a break, he had still managed to find a way to approach her. She told Lee she no longer felt like resting and preferred to keep enjoying the night. Her words earned praise from the other students, and to Lee it was even more intriguing. Lee warned Hakun not to drink too fast or she'd end up vomiting, but Hakun brushed it off, saying she was fine. Later in the woods, Tai and Hung shared a small kiss. Tae didn't understand the reason behind her sudden action, but before he could react, Hung apologized, saying she was just a bit tipsy. Earlier, Lee had directly asked Hakun if something was going on between her and Tai. The question caught Hakun so off guard that she started coughing, but she still asked what exactly Lee meant. To Lee, it wasn't strange. It was just that she had noticed Hung acting differently since Tae had been with Jia. Realizing her comment made her uncomfortable, Lee apologized. Trying to change the subject, Hakun said she saw Tae like the brother she never had. Lee didn't fully grasp what she meant by that. She personally wouldn't be able to watch the guy she liked be around another girl. Her words left Hakun blushing and thoughtful. While Lee remained lively with the rest of the group, Hakun took the moment to head to the bathroom. Lee said goodbye, but in her mind, Hakun realized Lee was a worthy rival. Could it be that she was also interested in Tae? For her part, Lee understood there were more contenders than expected, but she didn't plan on backing down for a second. She wanted to keep enjoying the party, even though most were already tired. That night, while Tae and Gia were together, she seemed a bit confused. Tae, on the other hand, was happy to finally get a moment alone with her. However, Gia excused herself, saying she had just remembered a commitment. Tae, unwilling to let her go, held her by the arm and asked her to sit. He had noticed she had been avoiding him since the day before and wanted to know why. Gia blushed deeply at his words, but ended up sitting down, feigning disinterest. She asked what he meant by saying she was avoiding him. Tae explained that ever since yesterday, she had been trying to keep her distance from him. Then he asked directly if she was scared. She had never been so close to any guy before. Just as Tae was about to speak about the kind of things she liked, she quickly covered his mouth and asked why he was talking about that. Wasn't he going to keep it a secret? Tae reassured her that she didn't need to worry. He wasn't going to make a scene. However, if she kept avoiding unconventional situations, he just wanted her to see things from a different perspective. Gia didn't fully understand what he meant, but Tae did. For the first time, someone genuinely cared about him. Tae knew who Gia really was, and that didn't embarrass him at all. In fact, his interest in her only grew stronger. He wanted to get to know her better, to understand her deeply. But before he could say anything else, he felt someone tap his shoulder. It was Hyung, looking at him curiously. Tae asked if something was wrong, and without hesitation, she commented that it seemed like he liked Gia. The comment left Tae completely stunned. He quickly covered her mouth, assuming she was a little tipsy and just saying nonsense. He just hoped Gia didn't take her words seriously, though at that moment, Gia didn't know how to respond either. For Tae, it was clear that Hyung had drunk too much, so he decided to take her to her room so she could rest. However, she felt so unwell that she ended up throwing up all over his clothes. Gia came over, worried, asking if everything was all right, but Tae took control of the situation and assured her he would take care of it. Later, Tae cursed himself for missing his chance. He needed to make things right. Still, he couldn't help but wonder why Hyung had to ruin things at that exact moment. After cleaning up in the bathroom, he wanted to know why she had done that. Seeing him, Hyung awkwardly apologized, unable to find the right words. For Tae, seeing a girl who usually got angry acting so shy softened his heart again. He decided to let it go and clean up the mess later. Since Hyung seemed to be doing better, he offered to walk her to her dorm. But she grabbed his arm and admitted she was still a little dizzy. Then she asked if he wanted to take a walk. Tae hesitated. He had a lot of work to do. But Hyung insisted, saying they still had time and proposed they play something. At that moment, the system announced the beginning of an event in the forest. As night fell, the activity started. Tae saw a system screen suddenly appear. Though it caught him off guard, he figured it was best to follow Hyung into the woods. Still a little flustered, Hyung thanked him for everything he had done for her that day. Tae, for his part, felt it was only right to help her since she'd always been there for him. Suddenly, Hyung stopped. She wanted to know if Tae's words had been sincere. She stepped closer, trapping him, and although Tae looked nervous, she took back what she had said before. At that moment, she wanted to have a mass. The system notified that the heroine's attraction level was sufficient to begin a mass, triggering the event. Without warning, Hyung kissed Tae. Surprised, he asked why she suddenly did that, but she, a bit flustered, apologized and said she was still a little dizzy. Tae knew they were on a trail and remembered how nervous she had been when they prayed in the infirmary. If someone found them, the situation would be even more embarrassing. Hyung looked at him directly and asked if he was scared, leaving him speechless. With a teasing smile, she said he had a cute junior right in front of him and asked again, was he afraid? Hyung kept teasing him, even though what she said didn't make much sense. Tae knew she had been toying with him for a while, so he asked if she was sure she wouldn't regret it. Instead of answering directly, Hyung asked, "Do you want me to stop?" That simple phrase made something snap inside Tae. Without thinking, he quickly stepped forward and took one of the buns she was carrying, stuffed it in his mouth without hesitation, hoping that this action would make Sun Nuna understand his answer. Hyung nodded, though she couldn't hide her embarrassment watching him eat so boldly, especially when he swallowed the gummy button without hesitation. Even so, Tae didn't stop. He wanted her to witness his jutsu to soothe her heart. Then he asked if she had planned all this from the beginning, back when they started walking together. Hyung, blushing, admitted that she had, though she blamed Tae for making the corruption in her heart overflow. Trying to calm herself, she asked Tae to read the Bible quickly, but in his mind, Tae felt the situation was far too dangerous to start reading just yet. Tae couldn't believe that someone like Hyung, always so confident, was acting this way. Even so, Hyung insisted that she wanted to pray by his side. She approached him, took the Bible, and was about to guide him. However, before she could do anything, Tae lifted her into his arms and embraced her tightly. Without saying a word, he began to pray with her, feeling that in that moment, the only thing that mattered was the warmth of her presence. Meanwhile, Lee was looking after the girls at the party while one of Gia's friends asked if she was planning to head to bed. Gia, however, wasn't so sure. She said she had something to take care of and decided to go for a walk instead. As she walked, memories of her date with Tae resurfaced. Ever since that day, she'd been thinking about him more and more. Just seeing his face would take her right back to that moment. She didn't know how to deal with it, especially after he confessed his interest in her and his desire to truly understand her. Those words had flustered her at the time, and now, even though she longed to hear them again, she feared it might be too late. Back in the forest, Hyung and Tae gazed into each other's eyes. She felt he was too close, but more than that, she sensed a strong connection through their shared faith. Though the feeling gave her a slight shiver, she endured it. They continued praying together in search of peace, until Hyung felt a warmth she couldn't describe. Noticing her state, Tae suggested a yoga position to help her relax even more, hoping she wouldn't lose her balance. Feeling her spirit renewed, Hyung asked Tae to read faster, without stopping. He obeyed without hesitation. At that moment, the system notified Tae of a spontaneous mission. This intrigued him. What kind of task would he be given this time? The system indicated that he needed to increase both Hyung's and Jia's affection levels at the same time. As a reward, he would receive a rapid progress bonus. Tae was stunned. Why both at once? It was the first time the system had given him such a challenge, especially in the middle of a situation like this. And why Jia, specifically? Right then, he heard a noise behind him. Turning around, he saw Jia standing in the distance. Tae couldn't believe his eyes. Jia, for her part, stood frozen, unsure of what she was witnessing. In his mind, Tae wondered what she was doing there. Shouldn't she still be at the camp with the others? Hyung, noticing he had stopped reading, asked why he had paused. Tae hesitated to tell her someone was watching them, so he denied it. If the system had given him this mission, there had to be a way to pull it off. Still, he couldn't take his eyes off Jia, but he also couldn't ignore Hyung. When Hyung pressed him about what he was looking at, Tae, acting on impulse, kissed her and told her it was nothing. They both closed their eyes. Then Tae whispered to her that someone was watching them. Hyung looked around but didn't see anyone, assuming Tae had imagined it. Thinking he was just getting back at her for calling him a chicken earlier, she laughed it off as a joke. Meanwhile, Jia's mind was spinning. Now she was sure that what she had overheard in the assistant professor's office hadn't been her imagination. Tae and Hyung really were praying together. But what kind of relationship did they have? She recalled how, moments earlier, Tae had locked eyes with her. Why had he continued the ceremony? Was it intentional? Watching his expression from the corner of his eye, she wondered. Was he telling her to watch? Tae and Hyung continued praying for peace, though he wished she would show more devotion. The sight made Jia blush at the situation. Tae remarked that if they kept going, someone might catch them and rumors would start circulating about a grad assistant who enjoyed outdoor ceremonies. Hyung didn't seem to care. In her mind, she wondered what would really happen if they were caught, but decided not to dwell on it. When she was near Tae, she felt like she was losing control of her emotions. She only wanted to continue their consecration, as she was about to find peace in her heart. However, she decided to try another yoga pose, and Tae agreed. But when he suggested the butterfly position, she became incredibly flustered. For Tae, the idea was that if anyone walked by, they'd be easily seen. Hakun, however, didn't quite understand what he meant. Tae commented that her soul seemed to say otherwise, as her corruption was overflowing even more. In that moment, she realized that the one who had been perverted all along was her. She had the same mindset as him. Still, Tae couldn't help but ask why she seemed to be enjoying this consecration more than the previous one. Hakun asked him to stop. She was too nervous with everything going on. But Tae kept praying, thinking that her excuses only made her look even cuter than expected. To Hakun, though, it wasn't an excuse at all. Meanwhile, Jia watched the scene with visible discomfort. The professor's assistant, who always looked so composed at school, now wore an expression of complete serenity. Jia began to wonder if she could feel that same calm if she were praying beside Tae. She felt her own sins stirring, but this time in a different way. It was a strange sensation, as if her soul was overflowing with corruption. Tae, on the other hand, noticed that his plan was working. He realized Gia was particularly sensitive to these kinds of situations, which made him chuckle quietly. Hakun glanced at him, a little embarrassed but curious. In the end, she gave him a quick kiss, not caring if someone walked by. She didn't want him to look away from her for even a second. She wanted his full attention. Tae understood. Even though the mission only involved Gia, he also wanted to help Hyung find her inner peace. So, while they prayed, Tae performed a jutsu. If they kept up the pace, he could lead Hakun to a divine revelation, and that's exactly what happened. He watched as she reached a state of inner peace, and with it, her affinity increased. Afterward, Hakun looked exhausted, to the point that Tai had to let go of her so she could lie down and rest for a bit. Still, the system notified Tae that he had received a fast-track ticket as a reward for completing the spontaneous mission. Although he had initially thought it would be difficult, he had actually managed to help 2 people achieve divine revelations at the same time. Luckily, he had succeeded because he understood their preferences. However, when he turned to look at Gia, she simply ran off. Tae wondered if seeing 2 people mid-consecration had been too much for her. Despite how cute she was, he assumed she was just embarrassed. But when he noticed she was now fully focused on praying by herself, he questioned if that was actually a good sign. He had only seen that kind of thing in movies. Then, looking back at Hakun, he felt a bit guilty. He had used her to increase Gia's affection. He approached and asked if she was okay, or if she wanted to get up. She shook her head, preferring to rest. But Tae pressed further, asking if she truly wanted to rest, or if they would continue with their prayers. Hakun hesitated. Was he really not satisfied with the peace in his heart yet? Tae stammered, saying he was just thinking about something else, but if she didn't want to continue, it was fine. Blushing, Hakun pulled out a photo of a puppy and told Tae they should resume their prayers. Tae didn't want her to push herself too hard, especially since it was getting colder and they could catch a cold if they kept going. But for Hakun, that didn't matter. She would do whatever it took to keep Tae's heart warm through prayer, so she insisted on continuing the reading. Hearing her say that, Tae was left speechless. Then he began to read the Bible again. Though he felt a bit dizzy, he couldn't help but notice how lovely Hakun looked up close. As he continued reading faster, he felt the cold wind brushing against his back, yet his heart stayed warm thanks to Hakun's presence. The contrast between the chill of the air and the warmth between them made the moment feel even more special. Upon sharing the moment with his Nuna, Tae decided to fetch some holy water to purify Hakun's soul. With that, they managed to revitalize her spirit even more, freeing her from her sins, although it took a considerable amount of water. Later, when Hung fell asleep, Tae had to carry her. He commented that she had dozed off, but after a sigh, he didn't make much of it and hoped she would keep resting. At that moment, the system notified him that the event forest at nightfall had been completed. By the time he returned to the camp, Tae felt awkward about entering the girls' lodging area and wondered what he should do next. Then a voice pulled him out of his thoughts. It was Lee, asking why he wasn't asleep yet. Tae didn't know what to say, but for Lee that didn't matter. She'd actually been looking for him to show off her dress. Still, she wondered how to get him to compliment her on it. She mentioned she still couldn't sleep, but what intrigued her the most was what had happened with Hung. A bit nervous, Tae explained that she had fallen asleep while they were walking, and he asked the professor if he could take her to the room with the other girls. Lee, however, looked at him directly and asked if what they did hadn't meant anything, or if she simply wasn't someone important to him. Tae didn't quite understand what she meant, but pretended it was nothing and assured her he would take care of Hyung. Then he thanked her for all her effort and gently suggested she head to bed. Tae turned to leave, thanking her, but as he walked away, she quietly whispered to herself, wondering if, as her boyfriend, he already saw her as someone who had given up. Tae turned around after hearing her murmur, but she simply smiled and said it was nothing, wishing him a good night. This left Tae deep in thought, unsure if he had heard her right. For her part, Lee felt that Tae was the one, even if she didn't understand how she had fallen for him so suddenly.